Nachman of Chrin, otherwise known as the Chirina Rav, the grandson of Rabbi Haron, the Rav of Breslov, took the teachings of Rabbi Natan and Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, and he put together this book, which he was later called Restore My Soul. I am just very humbly going to choose random parts of the book that speak about encouragement and hope and the subject of no despair. If you believe that it is possible to damage, believe that it is possible to repair. Even in the utter depths of hell, one can draw near to God. Even simple people referred to as prostakim, even wicked people, even non-Jews, all receive vitality from the Torah. Thus, even a simpleton who cannot learn, or one who is in a location where one cannot learn, also receives vitality from the Holy Torah. Therefore, one must strengthen oneself in fear of heaven to whatever extent one can, even when one ceases from Torah study, or one who cannot learn. All of them receive vitality from the Torah in a hidden manner. Through the great tzaddik, who sometimes behaves with simplicity. Even if one who has fallen extremely low and is lying in the utter depths of hell still has great hope. Through the true great tzaddik, through him, everyone can receive vitality from holiness, regardless of their location. Therefore, there is absolutely no cause for despair. Whatever the circumstances, even if one has fallen to a very low place, if one strengthens oneself as new, one still has hope of returning to God. The most important thing is, from the belly of hell, I cried out. For even a cry from the other depths of hell is never lost. One must cry out and never give up crying out, but continue to cry out and plead before God, regardless of circumstance, until God gazes down and sees from heaven. The evil inclination constantly knocks and entices a person. Even if one ignores it and turns one's back on it, it knocks again, a second time, a third, a fourth, and so on. But if one is strong-willed and stubborn against the evil inclination and completely ignores it, it then departs and goes away. The same applies to the thoughts that come to a person in prayer and confuse him. A thought comes to confuse a person repeatedly, again and again, and one must be strong not to pay any attention. Possessing an evil inclination is a great benefit, for then one can serve God, specifically with the evil inclination. That is, to overcome the passion of the evil inclination and to divert its power into serving God. Without an evil inclination, one's service has no value. This is why God allows the evil inclination to overwhelm a person so thoroughly, and especially one who truly desires to draw close to God. Although its surging and overwhelming brings a person to what it brings to many severe sins and blemishes, it is all worthwhile to God for the sake of the smallest movement one makes to flee while being intensely overwhelmed by the evil inclination. This is more precious to God than one who serves him 1,000 years without an evil inclination. All the worlds were only created for the sake of man, whose entire greatness and importance is only on account of his having such an evil inclination that he overcomes. Therefore, the more that it rises against the person, the more every slightest movement one makes against it is precious to God. God Himself helps a person with this, as the verse says, God will not abandon him in its hand. As said, there is absolutely never any cause for despair. The very perceiving oneself as being very far from God is itself cause for one to encourage oneself, for one is at least aware of one's distance. One could be so distant that one is not even aware of one's distance. So since one is aware of one's great distance, even when it is a fact, the very fact that one is aware of one's distance itself is very valued by God. For this alone, one should encourage oneself and strengthen oneself as much as possible. No, all these fails, backslides, and confusions must inevitably be endured before one can enter the gates of holiness. All the true tzaddikim and God-fearing people went through all of this. If you are extremely distant from God and it seems to you that you literally betray God every single moment, know that every single move that someone as gross as yourself makes to sever himself from this materiality, even the slightest movement to separate from one's physicality and draw close to God, is extremely great and precious to God. In this way, one runs thousands upon thousands of miles in the upper worlds. The most important thing is to strengthen oneself with joy, with all the varieties of advice concerning this, for sadness is very harmful. Therefore, one must make maximum effort to distance oneself from and drive away sadness and depression, whether by searching for and finding one's remaining good points, or through the fact that one has not created an idol worshiper. Generally, the only way to cheer oneself up is through humor and silliness, known in Hebrew as milte deshtuta. No, a person must cross a very narrow bridge in this world. And the most important thing is never to fear. By the standard of God's greatness and His supreme exaltedness, the slightest movement or glance inappropriate to God's glory deserves to be punished accordingly. But God is abounding in mercy, and the whole world is filled with mercy, and He greatly desires the world. Therefore, my beloved brother, you the reader, my heart and soul, be very strong and courageous and trust in God. He will not abandon you. Everything you are enduring is for your good. Rely on His limitless, abundant mercies, for God is very great. There is no limit to His greatness. Everything will ultimately be transformed to good, and sins transformed to merits. Only be strong and courageous. Possessing an evil inclination is a great benefit, for then one can serve God specifically with the evil inclination. That is, to overcome the passion of the evil inclination and divert its power into serving God. When one falls very deeply from one's level into very loathsome places called filthy places, falling into doubts and very unhealthy, indecent, and weird fantasies, and enormous confusions that twist the heart, although it is impossible to find God in these places, nevertheless, even there, one can still has great hope by searching for and seeking God from there, asking where is the place of his glory. The further that one perceives oneself to be from God's glory, the more one should be pained and ask and search for the place of his glory. Through this very searching and yearning for God's glory, being troubled and crying out in search of the place of his glory, one ascends to the ultimate level, reaching the aspect of ayah, where, which is a very high level of holiness, constantly searching and asking, where is the place of his glory? It is the essence of repentance, through which one's descent is transformed into a great ascent, as in a descent is for the purpose of ascent, as discussed in all of the holy books. See inside and understand, for this is a very deep matter. One must be very stubborn in serving God. Understand this well. Anyone who desires embarking upon the service of God, even the lowliest person, must endure countless advances and backslides and all types of falls and failures. Sometimes one is even intentionally driven away from serving God, and endless self-encouragement is required. Sometimes the only way one can encourage oneself and maintain one's resolve is through pure stubbornness, extremely great stubbornness. Remember this well, for you will need this very, very much. When one falls from one's level, one should know that this was intended from above. For becoming distance is for the purpose of drawing near. One's falling was in order to rouse one's heart to draw closer to God. In such a situation, one must begin serving God completely new, as if one had never started before. This is a great principle in serving God, to literally begin anew each day. When one begins looking at oneself and sees how far one is from good, and that one is filled with sin, one can despair and be unable to pray at all. One should thus search for and seek and find some good within oneself, for it is impossible that one has not done some mitzvah or good deed at some point in one's life. Even if upon examining the good that one has done, one sees that it is filled with blemishes and impurities, mixed with vested interests and impure motivations, it is impossible that there is not some good point in the little bit of good that one has done. One must thus continue searching until one finds in oneself some good point. And even if this itself is mixed with much unwanted intentions, it contains some good. One should thus search further until one finds some other good points in oneself. Through finding some merit and good in oneself, one truly crosses over from the scale of guilt to the scale of merit, becoming able to return in repentance. In this way, one can enliven and cheer oneself, regardless of one's situation, and then one can pray and sing and give thanks to God. One must be very careful to follow the above mentioned path, for it is a fundamental principle for anyone who wants to draw near to God and not forfeit one's life completely. More than anything else, one must distance oneself from sadness and depression as much as possible. For the main reason why most people are distant from God is because of depression and sadness. They despair upon seeing the great spiritual damage they have caused with their deeds. As each one knows in the wounds of his heart and his pains. On account of this, they despair, and most of them give up on themselves entirely. They don't concentrate on their prayers at all, and don't even do the minimal service of God, of which they are still capable. Therefore, one must pay close attention to this, for many have sunken in this way, for despair is the worst thing of all. So one must muster one's strength greatly to follow this path, always searching for good points in oneself in order to enliven and encourage oneself at all times. Through this, one will always be able to pray with passion, vitality, and joy, and truly return to God. One must be joyful at all times and serve God with joy. If one occasionally falls from one's level, one must encourage oneself with earlier attainments when one had reached some level of insight, sustaining oneself now with those earlier inspirations and illuminations. One's primary power is in the heart. One with a strong heart fears no one and no thing, doing awesome deeds of might, winning difficult battles through the strength and courage of his fearless heart, running into the thick of battle. The same applies to serving God. Depression is also very harmful, for it empowers the evil inclination. Therefore, one must be very determined to cheer oneself with all the methods explained elsewhere. For the primary source of strength is joy and delight, as in the delight of God is your strength. Being distanced from God is the beginning of drawing near. That is, when one wants to draw near to God, one is usually overwhelmed by harsh judgments, suffering, and numerous and immense obstacles. It seems to be one as if one is being pushed away. But all of this is for the very good. In order to draw him near, one must strengthen oneself to make the effort to withstand the test and not be driven away by the suffering, obstacles, and distancing, nor be deceived that one is being rejected. Rather, one must know and believe that all that one is enduring is for one's absolute good, so that one can overcome and draw closer. For the distancing is only for the sake of drawing one's closer. Therefore, there is a great evil inclination regarding drawing oneself near to God. Sometimes excessive enthusiasm is from this evil inclination, as in, lest they break through to ascend to God, one needs to ask for mercy to be spared from this. The evil inclination of some people is like a thin husk. This evil inclination only challenges one who is on a somewhat high level. But this is still not the evil inclination of the true tzaddikim, for their evil inclination is truly a very holy angel, one who is burdened by harsh judgments and is enduring suffering should make a particularly strong effort to be spared from the evil inclination, especially at such times. The evil inclination rises against one, for the primary root of the inclination of evil is harsh judgments. Some people have committed so many sins that they have fallen into concealment within concealment, on account of which it seems to them that there is no hope left for them. One who sins and repeats the sin perceives the sin as something permitted. This is the first level of concealment. But when one continues to sin, God becomes concealed from the person in a concealment within a concealment. Then it becomes very difficult to find God. But through Torah study, it is possible to arouse even such a person so that one comes to know God and that one also has hope. Eventually, one returns to the truth and draws close to God. Through the power of the true tzaddikim, one can indeed draw near to God at all times and from whatever and wherever one is. In very lowly and distant places from God, specifically there is concealed a very lofty life force representing the secrets of the Torah. Thus, whoever has fallen deeply must know that specifically in that place, one can draw especially close to God. For precisely there is concealed a very exalted life. Such a person merits returning to God. Specifically, through him will be revealed a high Torah teaching, that is, the secrets of the Torah. Whenever one is roused to repent and begin serving God and travel to the tzaddik, the evil inclination rises up against him more than ever. Therefore, one needs a greater determination and new strength at each point to face the new evil inclination that arises at each point. This is why the initial great enthusiasm one has to travel to people of truth is weakened when one begins the journey, and sometimes disappears completely by the time one reaches the tzaddik himself. As said, immediately upon being roused to travel to a true tzaddik, one overcomes one's initial evil inclination. But when one starts traveling, a stronger evil inclination is created. Whoever is greater than another, his evil inclination is also greater. Therefore, whoever wants to truly draw near to God needs new strength at every point to counter the new evil inclination that renews itself at each point. There are several types of evil inclination. The evil inclination of most people is very lowly and materialistic, truly a spirit of foolishness. For anyone with a bit of clear thinking, who has any slight apprehension of God's greatness, this evil inclination is certainly great foolishness and craziness. Even the temptation of sexual desire itself is foolishness for him, and he needs no effort to overcome it. However, his evil inclination is much higher than this. But the evil inclination of most people is truly great nonsense for anyone who has any intelligence. Some souls are very fragile like eggs, and the forces of evil, the Klipah of Amalek, attack these souls more than others. As the verse says, he struck all the stragglers amongst you. The true tzaddikim of every generation work to rectify even these souls. And the long process of their being rectified is the cause of the great prolongation of the exile. When these souls merit coming to the true tzaddikim and begin their rectification, they inevitably must endure great toil, suffering, and bitterness, physically, spiritually, and financially, in many different ways. The main purification of these souls is to greatly strengthen their resolve and never despair, rather always yearning for salvation. As the verse says, I yearn for you every day. Actually, no one can attain the desired good other than through pain, suffering, and great bitterness, which is an aspect of mourning intensely over the destruction of the temple, the main intent of which concerns our being so distant in our exile from our Father in heaven. But every individual must mourn deeply over one's own soul that is so far from its Father in heaven, and that evil overwhelms one ever strongly. Though this can be cause to err and say, my strength and hope in God is lost, one must nevertheless strengthen and comfort oneself greatly at all times, and be among the prisoners of hope, of whom the verse says, return to the fortress, O prisoners of hope. They are called prisoners because one should bind and the oneself tightly to true hope, never abandoning hope, for God's kindness are endless. His kindnesses are renewed every morning, and therefore it is good to hope silently for God's salvation. Anyone wanting to truly draw near to holiness must endure endless great bitterness, and the main thing is to remain firm in the holy yearning. One must have great brazenness, determination, and encouragement in this world throughout one's life to confront all various ways in which the forces of evil are always trying to push a person away. This happens mainly through the misperception of light as darkness, thus seducing a person to sin by presenting the forbidden as permitted and sins as mitzvot. Then after one has already fallen, evil appears again, this time enclosed as a mitzvah, attempting to topple a person and push him away entirely. Sometimes one can fall very deeply and become distant from God because of the truth. That is, because one truly knows that one has blemished and corrupted greatly. And even now, one is as one is. One therefore despairs of himself entirely. However, one must stay away from that type of truth. God's great mercy and kindness are boundless, and it is absolutely impossible to conceive his real intentions. Even in the midst of his anger and fury, for even then he desires that we beseech and pray to him, so that he can truly save us with complete salvation. Therefore, even at such times, one must strengthen oneself in prayer, imploring God and trusting in his great mercy and kindness, which is completely impossible to conceive. We find that after the golden calf, Moses understood not to look at the simple meaning of God's words that suggested that he wanted to destroy them, for this was not God's real intention. Rather, it was to spur Moses to redouble his efforts in prayer, to sweeten the judgments and accusations against the Jewish people. So Moses redoubled his efforts in prayer until God was appeased and relented from the evil. After which God taught him the order of prayer and revealed to him the 13 principles of mercy. It was then that God revealed to him the ultimate truth, that his true essence is overflowing, eternal mercy and kindness that never ceases. This is an aspect of God, merciful and compassionate, long-suffering, and great in kindness and truth. Meaning that the real truth about God is that his mercies and kindness are endless. So, prayer, supplication, crying out and moaning to God always help. For despite all that man angers God, his true mercies are still endless and eternal. And in every generation there are tzaddikim and upright people who always strengthen themselves in prayer, through which they sweeten all judgments upon the world and annul all evil decrees against the Jewish people, endowing them with true wisdom to strengthen themselves in prayer and supplication at all times. This is the ultimate truth. As the verse says, God is close to all who call him, to all who call upon him in truth. As for me, now my prayer to you, be at a propitious time. Answer me with your true salvation. True, for I believe that the ultimate truth is that even now, after I have done what I have done and endured whatever I have, you still desire to save me. And therefore I strengthen myself and pray. Answer me with the truth of your salvation. Understand very well to what degree one must strengthen oneself in prayer, whatever the circumstance. It is forbidden for a person to ever despair of oneself. One must strengthen oneself greatly with strong holy desires and yearnings, and believe that the very desire is itself very good, through which one can attain complete repentance, transforming one's distance from God into the catalyst of the closeness that follows, and one's descent into the catalyst of ascent. One must strengthen oneself greatly to pray and cry out profusely and practice hitbodedut. It may seem that one has been doing this for a long time without seeing any results, but one must continue protesting against the forces of evil that does not dispossess one of one's spiritual inheritance. The essence of perfect faith in the sages is to strengthen oneself to such a degree that one believes, even in oneself, that the great power of righteousness of the true tzaddikim will raise one up to great heights. In the meantime, even one's drawing close to and believing in the tzaddikim is very good and precious. And since the essence of faith is to believe in what one cannot understand with intellect, here too, although according to one's understanding and knowledge, one is still very far from God, one must have faith that even one small degree of good points is very precious in God's eyes. There is absolutely never any cause in the world for despair. God contracts himself from the infinite to the smallest details, hinting to a person to draw close to his service, each person as is fitting for him at the specific moment of time and space. Through this, one can always remember God in every place and time, and on all levels and existence. Through the Holy Torah, we, Bnei Yisrael, are bound to God at all times. The Holy Torah descends even to the uttermost depths to arouse even the lowliest person to God. And through Torah study, anyone can draw close to him, even those who have already sunken into the realm of the evil inclination and impurity. The words of Torah can never be touched by impurity and elevate a person to a state of purity. As long as a person strengthens himself in perfect faith, he always has hope. Rabbi Nachman expounded profusely about how one cannot hasten developments, even in the case of drawing close to holiness. Rather, one must patiently wait and wait expectantly for God's salvation until one's merits expressing oneself properly to God, begging for mercy and with supplication, until one merits receiving passionate words as hot as fiery coals. Then one must continue to wait until one's request is fulfilled and until one draws close to God as is fitting. Nevertheless, while waiting, one must not allow one's attention to stray from yearning and longing for God. And with these words, I just want to say that I have taken these words of Meshivat nefesh from the translation of the Karen of Rabbi Israel Odessa of the Rabbi Nachman organization. Thank you.